In our last episode, you would have seen Trinidad being located by Christopher Columbus and coming under Spanish rule, which lasted for 3 centuries, from 1498 to 1797. Governance, as practiced by the indigenous peoples, was eroded and forcefully replaced by a system of government involving a cabildo or municipal council led by a governor who represented the Spanish crown. This elected body at first comprised Spanish settlers and later those of French origin. When Britain captured Trinidad in 1797, it maintained this system of government before transitioning into constitutional government. Milestones to parliamentary democracy in Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad in Transition, 1797 to 1900. In the opinion of this council, the time has arrived for granting to the people of this island a voice in the management of their affairs and for amending the existing political constitution of the said island by providing that a fair proportion of the members of the Legislative Council be elected by the people instead of appointed by the governor as at present. These are the words of the Honorable Count Devertile, who made this announcement on December 3rd, 1894, while moving a motion in the Legislative Council. Count Devertile was the longest-serving member of the Legislative Council, which was a precursor to our Parliament today. But let us examine how we arrived at the Legislative Council, or LegCo, as it was more commonly known. When Britain successfully claimed Trinidad from Spain, its immediate challenge was the maintenance of law and order and the administration of justice. Understanding that establishing new laws might cause disorder, General Ralph Abercrombie, Commander-in-Chief, decided to keep Spanish laws and allow all existing administrative and judicial officers to remain in office. How are we progressing, General Abercrombie? It's been 2 weeks since Trinidad came under British rule. You must have some brilliant ideas about governing this new colony.
If only I were 2 men in 1. I have to govern Trinidad. Yet, I must get back to fighting those treacherous French. For the glory of Britain, let me ponder. I have the solution. Are you presently occupied?
Me? No. I'm just an observer in all this.
Summon Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Picton and John Nihel, Esquire. I need to see them both. Post haste! Listen, it is extremely urgent that I return to battle against Britain's enemies. Lieutenant Colonel Picton, I hereby appoint you military governor and commander-in-chief of Trinidad. You shall rule fairly and fearlessly. Magistrate Nihel, I am creating the post and appointing you the first Chief Justice of Trinidad. Legislate accordingly.
On June 29, 1901, Picton was further appointed as civil governor of Trinidad and was instructed to appoint a council of advice. This council had no lawmaking powers or control over the governor, but functioned in an advisory capacity only. Picton also made several new appointments: a clerk of the council, an attorney general, and a governor's secretary. The reorganizing of the administrative and judicial systems led to more effective internal control of Trinidad, but the lives of the settlers were subject to the sole will of Governor Picton. It is said in politics, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. With judicial, civil, and military power all in Picton's hands, his rule was brutal and marked by 6 years of oppression and dictatorship.
Governor Picton tortured people and he imprisoned people based on suspicion, and he would hang mercilessly, publicly, to send a message to others. And in the case of enslaved people, he would remove people's ears, he would brand them on their foreheads, and then they would be hanged after being imprisoned in a cell where the conditions were extremely bad. There had been numerous complaints to the British government about Governor Picton and his rule. So this commission was to deal with the criticisms the British government had been receiving from various groups of people, the humanitarians being one of them. Also, the groups in Trinidad who were anxious to have an assembly, they had been complaining about the arbitrariness of Governor Picton's rule. So whilst they were investigating the situation, they didn't want it to appear as though Picton had been fired. So he was included in the commission. But there's a general feeling that Fullerton, who was the chief commissioner, was sent to investigate Governor Picton.
By July 1803, the three-man Commission of Government was terminated. The Council of Advice oversaw the governmental issues of Trinidad until the British appointed Thomas Hislop as the new governor in 1804. One of the first tasks given to Governor Hislop by the British was to recommend a new constitution for the island. Rather than an elected assembly, Hislop recommended a nominated legislative council whose members the governor would choose and which would have lawmaking powers. But this recommendation omitted the voice of the landowning class who wanted the opportunity to select their own local government representatives. In the years that followed, a vigorous campaign for an elected assembly was conducted by the white male population. Eventually, a committee comprising Governor Hislop's nominees, Cabildo members, and the Council of Advice was set up in 1810 to consider this constitutional issue. However, the free coloreds were not invited to participate, and this led to another dramatic chain of events.
These people are preposterous. Imagine 236 free-colored inhabitants have signed this petition asking my permission to address the king. Bloody nonsense.
Well, I understand the free coloreds would like to have some measure of participation in whatever system of government that may be granted to Trinidad.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Apparently, the colored community fears that if an elected assembly is allowed from among the white population only, their legal rights and privileges would be further undermined.
Well, I don't believe these coloreds can be loyal and deserving British subjects. In fact, I hereby appoint a committee to investigate the character of these people who signed this petition, and God help them.
As a consequence of Governor Hislop's dictates, many of the free coloreds were interrogated, a few imprisoned, and some banished from Trinidad. These actions clearly prove that the country's political system at that time was undemocratic, and any political activity potentially dangerous. Despite Governor Hislop's actions, the contentious petition reached London.
Lord Liverpool reflected the Colonial Office position that the free colored would not be included in any system of government in Trinidad. There had been prejudice against the free coloreds, and there was no way they would allow that. In a slave colony, that was considered highly dangerous. It was a bad example for the enslaved who might feel that they could elevate themselves to such positions.
Lord Liverpool's decision ended all considerations for fundamental constitutional change in not only Trinidad, but all the conquered colonies. Since the debate over an elected assembly ended in 1810, it is considered that Trinidad adopted a pure crown colony government in that year. The year itself, 1810, was significant as it marked the beginning of a long struggle for civil rights by the free coloreds. In the years after 1810, the legal and political situation of the free coloreds continued to deteriorate under Trinidad's new governor, Ralph James Woodford, An order in council was introduced in 1822 that allowed magistrates to order coloureds to be flogged for petty offences. Coloured medical doctors also had to pay for a license to practice, while whites were granted these freely.
And Governor Woodford came to Trinidad with very wide powers to clear up the abuses in the society. He had powers as governor, as the man in charge of the armed forces and the navy. He also sat on the appeal courts, and he was in charge of Crown lands. So with these powers, he has been classified as the last of the powerful governors in Trinidad.
By 1812, the British government became aware that reforms were essential for governing Trinidad, as the legal system was confusing since it combined Spanish and British procedures. At the end of 1831, a council of government was instituted, comprising a governor as president, 6 official and 6 unofficial members. This council was later renamed the Legislative Council. This is Cabildo House. On my left is what is now called the Cabildo Chambers, which houses the Ministry of the Attorney General. From the rooftop of the ministry, one can see the courtyard design of Cabildo House, reflecting Spanish architecture and a time in our political history. On June 6, 1840, after almost 250 years of its existence, the Council of Government abolished the Cabildo and replaced it with a town council, modeled on English municipal bodies. This new town council was to be strictly subordinate to the local government, a practice that remains in place today.
Right, the Legislative Council was instituted in 1832. It was a body that was intended to facilitate the introduction of the English system. I mean, there were concerns about a society that was heavily French. It was made up of the governor, who sat as president, and there were 6 officials and 6 unofficials. The governor nominated the official members from among the more prominent citizens of the country. Well, the British government hoped that this would cause a reduction in the pressure for an assembly system, because there would be a participatory element. Secondly, they hoped to institute an English system and diffuse it more into the society. And thirdly, they thought that the Legislative Council could help to institute a system which would facilitate the processes of emancipation and beyond.
Notwithstanding the consolidation of Crown colony government, there continued to be campaigns for constitutional reforms in the late 19th century, with reform movements demanding an elected assembly. Of the 2 main campaigns, the first involved Philip Rostand, a white French Creole journalist who used his newspaper called Public Opinion to mobilize public support. This support resulted in a petition signed by over 5,000 people, prompting a Royal Franchise Commission to be set up in 1887 to consider whether Trinidad was ready for elected members in the Legislative Council and to recommend a suitable franchise. Not surprisingly, the recommendations of the Royal Franchise Commission were rejected by the Colonial Office, who believed that Crown Colony government, with its appointed governor and officials, successfully protected the weak and ignorant against the white planters. However, it did introduce a new time period, reducing the traditional lifetime service of official members to a substantive period of 5 years, and allowing unofficial members to sit on the council. The second campaign from 1892 to 1895 was organized mainly by the black and colored lawyers who were members of Trinidad's middle class. Their purpose was to enfranchise men of property and education who were qualified to vote for the town councils and who sat as jurors. They were not interested in enfranchising the working class, whether black or Indian, and did not attempt to mobilize them.
Take Bluetooth to your phone. She sings? No, she doesn't sing, she acts.
And she acts.
Yeah. She acts.
Dr. Lawrence.
Mr. Dr. Lawrence, I presume.
Order, gentlemen, order. Let's bring this meeting to order. Mr. Lazier, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe I speak for one and all when I point out that the time has come for us to open up the higher ranks of the civil service in Trinidad to persons born in Trinidad, more particularly blacks and colored Creoles. We have among us persons who are qualified by virtue of education and training and who ought not to be excluded by virtue of the practice of appointing expatriates.
Hear, hear. Dr. Lawrence.
Yes, I would like to add that that position should also be open to the higher offices of the medical and legal professions, which are also limited to expatriate appointments.
I see we have amongst us the owner and editor of the New Era newspaper, Mr. Joseph Lewis. Mr. Lewis, I compliment you for giving us a voice in your journal to express our political views.
Mr. Chairman, I beg that you may recognize Samuel Carter from Tobago, owner and editor of a newspaper that agitates for our cause, the San Fernando Gazette.
Acknowledge, Mr. Carter. We note not only your vigilance against the system of Crown Colony government, but also those who appear to oppress the African race in Trinidad. Let us not stray from our topic on our agenda. We are seeking constitutional reform first and foremost for Trinidad's free blacks and colored middle class, of which we are all members, so we can assume our rightful place in the governance of this country.
Trinidad in transition. This characterizes the first few centuries of British rule on the island. If we recall the words of Count Devertile, whose bust is prominently displayed in today's parliamentary chamber, the time has arrived for the granting to the people of this island a voice in the management of their affairs. By the end of the 19th century, the overwhelming majority of Trinidad's population was still excluded from the political process. The interests of the working class in particular were ignored, since they didn't have any effective representation in the system of Crown Colony government. The increasing grievances faced under this system influenced even more radical constitutional reform movements in the 20th century, including riots and setting the Red House on fire. We will discuss this in our next episode of Milestones, the Parliamentary Democracy in Trinidad and Tobago. Do join us.